Heavenly Father, teach us to use our freedom to help to preserve and strengthen the freedom of all. By respecting and upholding its laws, by supporting our law enforcement agencies, by informing ourselves on current issues, by voting regularly and wisely, and by honoring the rights of other people. And now bless this food to our use and us to your service. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mike. Ken Pope coming up to introduce our visitors and guests.
Good afternoon. We're always thrilled to have guests and visitors with us, and we have a few of those today. And if you would, when I call your name, if you'd please stand and remain standing until all have been introduced, and then we'll give you a big welcome. Kimberly Kirk is a guest of Mike Hawley. Kimberly right here in the middle. Josh Ward, a guest of Phil Van Hoy. Good to have you. Kevin Poet, who's a guest of Mike Hawley. I believe you spoke to us a year or so ago, and he's with Siemens. Peter Rensel, who is a guest of Dumont Clark over here. And Josh Hoyle, who's a guest of Howard Hoyle. Lost. Back here, back in the line. And then we have one visiting Rotarian that we know of, Gene Stewart, who is from the Charlotte International Club. Welcome, please come back. We'd love to have you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, everybody, I tell you what, stay standing, because the composite committee, co-chaired by Rudy Rudisell and David Zimmerman, are bringing us Chris Kemper today for a song. Chris, are you here, I hope? There we have it.
And yes, and I am charging you guys for this, so there's going to be a hat that's going to go around that I expect to be paid for this. Just kidding.
First, we'll talk about that.
Okay, that's true.
The song.
Yes.
The song.
I thought we'd do a fun song with everything that we've been hearing the last couple of days. So let's sing "You Are My Sunshine." You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Great job. Do I get to pass the hat? Okay.
Thanks for not doing the second stanza of that. So, we don't do much business, technical business, other than at this time of year. And so I'm going to ask Katie Tyler, who is the chair of the nominating committee, to come up here and conduct business.
As immediate past president, it is my role to convene and chair the nominating committee for the future year. And I am pleased to acknowledge the nominating committee, which consists of myself, the immediate past president, the president-elect, and the three most available past presidents, who this year were John Tabor, Marilyn Bowler, and Ron Kimball. And of course, we can't do anything without Sandy, even if she's in an ex officio capacity. So joining the existing members who will continue to serve for another year, our recommended slate of board members includes Colleen Brannon, Stuart Hare, Stephanie Heinrichs, Chris Kemper, Chad Lloyd, Alexandra Myrick, and Ed Peacock. And filling our officer roles, we are recommending Phil Volpone, who is also the district treasurer, and of course Sandy Osborne to continue in the executive secretary role, and to serve in the president-elect nominee position to serve as president in the year 2021, Jerry Cotter. So this is the nominating committee's recommended slate. Our bylaws require that we open up nominations to the floor. So if there are any nominations to be heard from the floor, now would be the time.
Move the
I hear the nominations have been closed and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. President?
Let's give Katie a big round of applause. It actually is a big job. So we have a motion from the committee on the floor, does not require a second since it's coming from the committee. Is there any discussion about the motion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion to elect those as stated by Katie, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? So done, and congratulations to all of you and Jerry in particular. Thank you. Let's give him one more round of applause. Ed Wadsworth is going to come up and give us a quick update on our exchange program.
The picture of Kuba, who most of you have met, he's our international student from Poland, a delightful, by the way, low-maintenance guy. Over the last, since the 1960s or prior to that, our club has been fortunate enough to host international kids among the 4,000 to 5,000 that are around the world in motion every year. And every year as we've hosted folks, we've been thankful to have Rotarians volunteer on a 3-month cycle to host our students as they attend a local high school. Kuba is now attending South Mecklenburg High School, and we're particularly challenged at this point, frankly, because more than ever we have before, we still do not have a host family for this winter or spring. And unless, don't tell Kuba this, but unless we can find somebody in the next week or 10 days, we're going to have to entertain the option of sending him home at Thanksgiving, back to Poland. So I would really encourage any of you that are in, especially in the South Mecklenburg school system or near there, if you're near South Mecklenburg, we can accommodate perhaps providing transportation from the school anyway. Let Bill Lofton or I know, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
2 new members we have to introduce today. So Travis and Pender, if you guys would come up and do the honors, we would appreciate it. It's like Pender's up here first. You get to go first, Pender.
Very much, President Mike. It's my pleasure to introduce Mike Ranson as a new member of the Rotary Club of Charlotte. Mike is a native of Charlotte. He was born and raised here, graduated from Myers Park High School. He has a BS in Business Administration and Accounting from UNC Chapel Hill. He has been engaged in financing, financial consulting, disability insurance, and working with Blue Cross Blue Shield as an employee benefits consultant. And he's now an employee benefits consultant with USI Insurance. His hobbies are tennis, cycling, fly fishing, traveling, sports, and racing. Busy fella. Oh, excuse me, that's reading. I just had cataract surgery. I'm trying to read without my glasses. So. He's a member of First Presbyterian Church, and he will be the 9th member of this Rotary Club who is a member of First Presbyterian Church. He has a son, Walker, who's with Bank of America in New York, and Marshall, who's a recent graduate of UNC Chapel Hill and is now in commercial real estate in Charlotte. So join me in welcoming Mike as a new member.
Thank you, Pender. Travis, you're up next, and then we'll do the honors up here.
All right, good afternoon. It's my honor and privilege to introduce now the newest member of Charlotte Rotary, and that's Scott Gakenmeyer. He is a region sales vice president with PepsiCo, actually the Frito-Lay division of PepsiCo, and I was curious as to what the most popular Frito-Lay brand was, and he told me it was actually the original Lay's potato chips. I was kind of surprised by that. I'm a kind of a Fritos guy. But he moved to Charlotte for some unknown reason from Honolulu, Hawaii, back in 2001 with Frito-Lay. He's been with Frito-Lay his entire career. He is a Wahoo ×2. He's obtained 2 degrees from the University of Virginia and systems engineering in his MBA. He's always been an active member of the community. He was a member of the Rotary Club in Honolulu for 4 years. He is slowing down the process at PepsiCo and is going to be retiring in March of 2019. He enjoys spending time with his family in South Park. He is married with 3 children, 2 daughters, and a son. In his free time, he enjoys playing golf and running. And we are very excited about him joining the group. I know Scott will be very engaged and be a great addition to Charlotte Rotary. So please welcome Scott.
Thank you, guys. And if you'll step up over here, I'll give you your Rotary pins and your roster, and look forward to seeing both of you on a regular basis.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Great stuff. If you're not reading the Rotary Reflections that we put out on Monday, a lot of this is the result of the kinds of activities and the efforts that we're asking you guys to make. As a committee of the whole, the membership committee of the whole, send some notes as like the one that you can cut and copy and paste and embellish that's in the Rotary Reflections this week. And send along with it the roster of speakers. We've got some wonderful speakers, as I'm sure you've seen, and we'd love to get some more people in here to see exactly what we're doing. So thank you in advance for that. The warm clothing drive is underway right now, Crisis Assistance Ministry. Folks are down there in the parking deck as you come in every meeting, so please bring whatever you can to that cause. The Culinary Committee, as I've mentioned, is going to meet in Studio 1 following our meeting now. Just a reminder, if you didn't need to be reminded, there's an election next week. And Michael Bitzer is going to be here to speak. We haven't had him here for quite a while, but I mean, he is the expert on North Carolina politics and elections, and he's going to come speak to us on a day when I think his topic's going to be some perspectives on what you're likely to wake up to the next morning. So it'll all be going on as he's speaking.
Our speaker today is North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein. Josh was sworn in as our 50th Attorney General in January of 2017. Before being Attorney General, Josh had worked in the AG's office as a senior deputy. He then served in the state Senate. And probably his most unique job before doing all that was that he was a high school teacher in Zimbabwe. I don't know that we'll hear a lot about that today. Probably will hear about his activities related to the opioid crisis and the actions that his office has taken in regard to that. Josh is a graduate of Dartmouth College and got both a law degree and a public policy degree from Harvard University. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Attorney General Josh Stein.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mac, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the introduction. It is a pleasure to be with everyone. Always nice to be in Charlotte. Charlotte was my first hometown. I spent my first 5 years here before we moved to Chapel Hill, which is where I grew up, did my schooling, and now I live in Raleigh. I love speaking to Rotarians. In fact, I was with the Raleigh Downtown Club yesterday, so I don't know where I'm going to be tomorrow, but I got to find a Rotary Club somewhere in North Carolina to address. But I'm a big fan of your 4-way test, where you ask, is it the truth? Is it fair for all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all? I just think this is a wonderful framework with which to live. And frankly, I think our nation and our world will be a much better place if we all ascribe to the standards that you do. And so I want to thank you for that, for propagating those values, for living those values, for trying to make North Carolina a better place for everybody. That is my ambition as well. And that's why I love my job. I am Attorney General. I've been on the job now 2 years. And basically, I get to go to work every day with wonderful, talented, dedicated public servants trying to protect the people of this state in a host of different ways. We protect families by combating crime. We do that in a number of ways. We handle criminal prosecutions when referred by a local DA. We handle every criminal appeal in the state. So anytime someone's been convicted and appeals that conviction, it's handled by my office. We operate the state crime lab where we analyze crime scene evidence. You all in Charlotte have your own crime lab, but you're the only jurisdiction in North Carolina that does. Everyone else uses the state crime lab. And one issue that I'm tackling hard right now is the depressing number of untested sexual assault evidence collection kits. 15,000 untested kits in North Carolina, more than any other state in the country. And so I'm trying to get the state of North Carolina focused on marshaling the resources and developing policies to make sure that we both test those kits and ensure that it never happens again. I also engage in various policy debates that affect public safety. My highest priority issue since I've been on the job is tackling the opioid epidemic. It is the gravest public health and public safety issue facing our state and our country. We lose about 4 people every day in the state of North Carolina to an opioid overdose. Deadliest drug epidemic ever. We have lost 13,000 lives over the last 18 years or so. The sad reality is the trend line is going like this, and there's no indication that it is topping yet. We're not bending the curve, as they say. Tens of thousands of people are struggling with addiction. It's a devastating disease. If you have anyone in your world, your family, your friends, or loved ones who are suffering, you know what it's like. Couple in Greensboro, Steve and Mary Sue, their son Caleb was a star baseball pitcher, got a college scholarship, pitched in college, and tore his rotator cuff. He had surgery and, as is typical, was prescribed a lot of painkillers, and he became addicted to them. When he couldn't get his hands on those anymore or afford them on the street, he went to heroin. And what's killing people mostly today is this illicit fentanyl. It's mainly coming from China, but drug dealers are mixing it with heroin because it's 50 times more potent than heroin. And a little bit can kill you, and it is. It's killing young people. The United States is the only industrialized nation in the world that has a declining life expectancy. Life expectancy in the United States is going down. Every other country in the world, it's going up, and it's directly attributable to this opioid epidemic. So I've made tackling it my top priority. We have a comprehensive strategy that involves prevention, treatment, and recovery, and enforcement. My office authored legislation that will reduce overprescribing, and we've also given tools to law enforcement so that they can go after the drug traffickers bringing illicit poison into our state that's killing people. I'm partnering with the Secretary of Department of Health and Human Services, Mandy Cohen, on a public education campaign that we're going to roll out early next year to educate really the decision makers in a family, the people who make healthcare decisions in their family, to empower them to have their conversations with their medical professionals about how do I deal with pain without creating a risk for addiction. And to the extent any of your businesses want to partner with us, this is going to be a comprehensive statewide initiative with a number of private sector partners. So just find me afterward. I also am supporting local law enforcement initiatives to get more people people with addiction, people with the disease of substance use disorder, getting them out of the criminal justice system and into the healthcare system. Because I was just talking with Sheriff Riley's mom, over here, Sheriff Riley up in Cabarrus. I talk to law enforcement all across the state, and what they say repeatedly, and it doesn't matter if I'm in the country or from the city, they say, we cannot arrest ourselves out of this. People are addicted when they're arrested, they're addicted when they're in jail, they're addicted when they're out of jail, and then they just proceed to engage whatever activity got them in jail in the first place. So we have to break the cycle. That involves treatment, which is why I am actively advocating that North Carolina join the vast majority, 3/4 of the states in this country have accepted the federal government's offer to expand Medicaid to provide health insurance to hundreds of thousands. We have hundreds of thousands of people in North Carolina who are working but don't have health insurance. And so when they're sick with something like substance use disorder, they can't afford the medication to get well. So if we were serious about this issue, that's the first and simplest thing the state of North Carolina legislature could do to tackle the opioid epidemic. I'm also helping to lead a multi-state investigation, about 40 attorneys general, Republican and Democratic, from across the country, to investigate the role of the drug companies. They were making billions and billions and billions of dollars while millions of people were becoming addicted to the pills, which they advertised as being safe, when obviously we now know they're not. I have sued Purdue Pharma, I've sued Insys Therapeutics. If I determine that the other drug manufacturers and drug distributors are not prepared to step up and play a constructive role in cleaning up the mess that they helped to create, I will hold them accountable as well. In addition to the criminal work we do, we protect seniors, students, consumers from scam artists and corporations that break the law, trying to take people's hard-earned money. Last year, we won settlements and awards totaling $75 million to return back to the people and state of North Carolina. One issue that we're focused on intently involves price gouging. In the wake of Hurricane Florence in southeastern North Carolina, I don't know if any of y'all been to Wilmington or New Bern or any place else in eastern North Carolina. It's just devastating. Folks lost everything. And what is sad is there are people out there who will prey on people when they're at their most vulnerable and desperate to make a buck. And the law doesn't allow it, and we are aggressively enforcing it. We just yesterday won 2 preliminary injunctions against some tree removal companies, out-of-state tree removal companies, charging $15,000, $29,000 for a single tree. That was down. They didn't even have to cut it. They just had to remove it. Unconscionable, and we won't tolerate it. Another issue that we're focused on has to do with security breaches. Technology makes our life better in so many ways, but when we have these few massive corporations that are aggregating incredible amounts of sensitive data about us, it creates real risks. You all remember last year, Equifax, the data credit reporting agency, had a breach affecting 148 million Americans, 5 million North Carolinians, and I'm sad to tell you it's 2 out of 3 of you have been affected by it. And if you want to know whether you were likely to have been affected and what you can do to protect yourself, we have great information on our website, ncdoj.gov/Equifax. Well, I'm investigating Equifax. We just reached a resolution with Uber, which had a security breach affecting, it more affected their drivers than their customers, but they knew about that breach for over a year and didn't tell anybody. And it was only when it got uncovered that they came clean. And in that year, had they told folks, they could have taken proactive steps to protect themselves and reduce the risks of identity theft. And they didn't. And so they settled with us for $148 million about 2 weeks ago. And this is an issue that I have cared about a long time, and it's not just because 2 weeks ago I learned that someone filed income taxes in my name and claimed my refund, which I just discovered from the IRS. Very disheartening. So one thing I've done is we've scrubbed state law to see how protective is it of us. And when I worked in the Attorney General's office before, as Mac mentioned, I actually helped to write that law back in '05, and it's a really good law. But there's been a lot of developments over the last 13, 14 years. And so I'm working with Representative Jason Stein up in Lincoln County to improve and strengthen our identity theft protections. And we will be pushing that forward in the next legislative session. At the Attorney General's office, we also protect taxpayers by going after healthcare providers defrauding Medicaid and tax cheats. We have to date returned about $50 million from violators back to the government. For instance, there was a criminal ring. That's what they're nothing other than that. Healthcare providers that were fraudulently billing. They weren't overbilling, they were fictionally billing patients that did not exist. The Medicaid system. They have been forced to return $18 million back to the state, and collectively those 5 providers are looking at 40 years in prison thanks to the prosecutors in my office. When folks cheat the government, it forces all of the rest of us to pay more than our fair share, which is not right, which is not legal, and which we will not tolerate. I also protect the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, by holding polluters accountable. You all may have heard about a company outside of Fayetteville called Chemours. It used to be a DuPont facility, and they manufacture a chemical called Gen X, which is the Teflon coating on cooking pans. Well, on behalf of the Department of Environmental Quality, I took them to court for exceeding their discharge permit. They were just spewing it into the Cape Fear River, which provides drinking water for much of southeastern North Carolina, all of Wilmington, a couple 100,000 people. And so while that litigation is ongoing, the court has ordered them to cease all discharge. And now we're fighting over the air emissions. Gets up in the air, hits the ground, sinks into the surface water. And so we want to make sure that when people turn on the tap at their home to drink water, that they know that water is safe and clean and it's not going to hurt their family. Another environmental issue I've been focused on involves drilling for oil and gas off of North Carolina's coast. The administration has announced a plan where they want oil rigs off of the Atlantic and Pacific seaboards. So I organized a coalition of attorneys general from both the East and the West Coast to communicate with Secretary of Interior Ryan Zinke our opposition to that plan and our willingness to do whatever it takes to ensure that our pristine coast remains so, and the tens of thousands of jobs that depend on it remain vital and healthy here in North Carolina. I also protect our fundamental rights at the Attorney General's office, and I believe that the most fundamental right in our democracy is the right to vote. It's how we hold our governments accountable. You all may remember that in 2013, the legislature passed a law that election law experts characterized as the most restrictive anti-voter law that any state in the entire country had passed in the 50 years since the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And that law was challenged and went to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which for the non-lawyers in the room is the court right below the U.S. Supreme Court. And a panel unanimously concluded that in 5 distinct ways that law targeted African American voters with, quote, almost surgical precision. Well, in the final days of his administration, the previous governor petitioned the United States Supreme Court to try to reinstate that law. As Attorney General of North Carolina, I successfully withdrew the petition because my belief is that the state of North Carolina should be about protecting people's right to vote, not restricting it. I also believe that the state of North Carolina should be about protecting the health of our democracy and our individual liberties. The document, the foundational document in the state of North Carolina is our Constitution. That's where we arrange the structure of government. It's where we put in protections, our individual liberty protections. One does not monkey around with the Constitution lightly. There should be extended public discussion, deliberation, input to make the determination, is this going to make our government better? Is it going to make us freer as a people? And what we had was a legislature that sprung a special session in June or July, I can't remember when, in which they put 6 amendments onto the ballot this November. 6. It's just an unprecedented number. Not unprecedented, but in decades there hasn't been anything like it. There was never any opportunity for anyone from the public to offer their thoughts. There were never any hearings about these amendments. They were just dreamed up in some back room and within days put to the voters. One of the amendments will make it harder for some folks to vote, particularly minorities. One will tie the hands of future legislatures to deal with financial crisis, which will inevitably arise. They happen. 2 of them will dramatically reduce and restrict the separation of powers, the checks and balances that are in our government, by taking power over the judiciary, over the executive branch, and putting it in the hands of just a few legislative leaders. I serve on something called the Constitutional Amendments Publication Commission, along with Secretary of State Elaine Marshall and the head of the Legislative Research Commission, or Services Commission, Paul Coble. And our statutory charge is to explain those amendments to the public. And in the process of doing a deep dive on the amendments, I became incredibly troubled, not only from the substance of them, but the words on the amendment that will actually go into the Constitution were utterly disconnected from the words on the ballot that people would be voting on. So Governor Cooper and I went to court to protect our democracy by arguing you cannot have voters vote on something that is deceptive and misrepresentative of what the effect will be. It's like being told you're buying candy and you're eating cat food. They're just two different things. In my consumer protection world, it's called false advertising. So we went to court and we won, and the courts threw those amendments out. So then the legislature convened another special session in which they've now put the amendments back on the ballot in narrowed form. But even as redrafted, every single living former governor, Republican and Democratic, and 2 former mayors of Charlotte, every single living former Chief Justice, Republican and Democratic, opposed these amendments because of the damage it will do to the checks and balances inherent in our tripartite system of government. I oppose those amendments. I strongly encourage you all to read and study them carefully. And I think, to me, the standard is you do not change the Constitution unless you have been convinced it will make people's lives better. And that's what I hope you ask yourself before you go vote. If you have not already, Election Day is today, Election Day is tomorrow, Election Day is through the weekend, and then, of course, finally on Tuesday. And I hope and I expect all of you will participate in shaping this state. I want to thank you all for the invitation, the opportunity to talk to you today. And I want to thank you for all that you do for Charlotte, all that you do for North Carolina. Your mission is about providing service to others, promoting integrity, advancing world understanding, goodwill, and peace. I mean, my goodness, that is what it is about. And these are rough times. These are very rough times. I think we all feel shaken about where is the goodwill? Where is the peace? Where is the leadership that is asking us to aspire to our better selves rather than trying to get out the worst in us, which exists, sadly, in each of us? So, as your Attorney General, I embrace and applaud your mission, and I look forward to furthering it with you in the months and, God willing, the years to come. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Josh. We got plenty of time for questions, and we had Governor Martin and Governor McCrory here, and I think on the issue of just to clarify on the issue of the amendments, I think that there's been some debate about how many of those amendments are opposed by that group that you cited, and I think it's really 2, as I understand it. Is that what you're?
100% correct. Governor Martin, Governor McCrory are clear about their opposition about the last 2 amendments. Just one little piece about the, I'm trying to come up with an adjective that doesn't get me in too much trouble, about the thoughtfulness of this legislature. They had passed a law that charged the commission that I serve on with Marshall and Coble to not only explain the amendments, but to come up with the caption on the ballot so that people know. When you have 6 amendments, it's very confusing. Which one are you talking about? So we were to define the caption so people would say, oh, that amendment, that amendment, that amendment. Well, the legislature was not even aware that they'd done that. And then there's a wonderful former employee of the legislature for 40 years, a guy named Jerry Cohen, brilliant lawyer. He pointed out in a tweet after they went home and said, that's very odd that this legislature is giving Stein and Marshall the ability to explain what these amendments are. And they said, oh my God, we did that. So they called another special session in which they stripped us of that authority. And in fact, the law said you cannot even number the amendments on the ballot. You have to just leave them amendment. Each one says amendment, which makes it very hard to be precise about which ones you're talking about. Well, it turns out it's the last 2 amendments that McCrory and Martin are opposed to. I don't know if they have stated positions on the other 4, but thank you for the clarification.
Okay, good. Questions? Yes?
Can you talk about the First Amendment in the list? It's confusing because I can see people on both sides being pro and con against it. It's the Marcy's Law, the crime victims one. Can you give us the pros and cons of that one from your?
I think it's the second one.
Yeah.
Just a
And-
perfect example of the confusion.
Well,
When did you just say amendment?
And if you could repeat the question,
I'll be
and
happy
and
to.
we'll, brief answer. Yeah.
So he asked specifically about the question related to the amendment involving the Crime Victims Bill of Rights, otherwise known as Marcy's Law. There's a number of TV commercials about it. Excuse me. This amendment, there is already an existent crime victims' rights in the Constitution. What Marcy's Law does is that it makes it more express the rights that crime victims have. Under the current Constitution, what a lot of the provisions say is the right to be notified by the prosecutor on anything affecting your case as provided by law, meaning that this constitutional provision is not self-effectuating. There has to be a statute to give meaning to what the right is under the Constitution. So what the amendment will do is we'll take a lot of that flexibility that exists today by statute and put it and concretize it into the Constitution. I think that we were talking about it earlier, Mac and I were, there are victims' rights organizations that are actually on both sides of the issue. One issue is it's going to cost the criminal justice system a lot of money to put into practice, tens of millions of dollars. And so one concern that district attorneys had is what are going to be the consequences of this in terms of our ability to make sure that we're not only being sympathetic and responsive to the rights of victims, but do we even have the capacity to then prosecute the criminals? And so those are sort of the issues that people are wrestling with.
Councilman Driggs.
Mr. President, I wanted to point out that I'm a little troubled in our club by the fact that we have such an articulate opponent to an item that is currently on the ballot, but nobody here to speak for the other side. I don't think it's in keeping with the tradition of fairness and even-handedness of our club that during the election process, we would hear that side of what is obviously an ongoing political dispute in Raleigh between the administration and the General Assembly. So I just offer that as a comment. I don't know that we need to discuss it. I just wanted to kind of point that
That's
out.
well taken, and I thank you for it.
I do have a question for our speaker as well.
Yeah, please.
And appreciate your comments otherwise. How do you work with the district attorney in terms of your opioid campaign? We have a lot of issues here in Charlotte that relate to prosecutions of drug offenses, the suggestion that they are kind of racially skewed and that they disadvantage certain people. So what can you do to help him to respond to the kind of public perception?
Well, District Attorney Merriweather is hard at work focused on ensuring that the criminal justice system treats people as fairly as possible and that it does not disadvantage somebody based on what color they are or how much money they have in their bank account. And so one issue that I've been working with him on has to do with pretrial release and accountability. Unfortunately, the way our system works is once you're arrested, then you go to jail unless you can post bond is the standard process. Something like 80% of people incarcerated in North Carolina have not been convicted. They're in jail pre-trial. And obviously we have a central tenet under the law that people are innocent until proven guilty. The law allows for people to be detained pre-trial if they're a risk to the community, if people are going to be put at danger by their release, or there's some flight risk that they're going to go to Bermuda or whatever. And we've gotten away from those principles, and now it's just become routinized that people need to post bond. That has the effect of penalizing poor people, because you could have a vicious murderer who has a $250,000 bond who can post it like that, and then they're back on the street, versus somebody who engages in a misdemeanor. And this happens all the time. People are commit a misdemeanor. Even if they're convicted of the misdemeanor, the cap maximum would be 5 days. throughout the state of North Carolina, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people incarcerated today for much longer than if they had been convicted of the offense they were initially arrested for. So that is an issue that concerns both him and me, and we're working hard to try to make the system fairer for people.
Dumont Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. You'll be glad to know we have a great system of release upon personal recognizance here that deals with that situation. I think a lot of other counties can learn from that. In a number of states, medical professionals, doctors, have been found to be essentially making a living out of prescribing opioids in vast quantities in conjunction with pharmacists who turn a blind eye to the medical establishment, which sort of self-regulates itself, as well as the pharmaceutical industry, pharmacy business. Are they cooperating with you? Are you pursuing that avenue? Because that's the way a lot of people get opioids in this county and the other 99.
Great question, and I want to actually endorse your first comment about how good Mecklenburg County is about dealing with this pretrial issue. I'm actually convening a conference in January of about 20 counties that are dealing with this issue in one way or another, and there's no question that Mecklenburg is the most advanced and sophisticated and furthest along. Y'all have been wrestling with this about 4 or 5 years, and so you're really the poster child here in Mecklenburg that I want to actually show to the rest of the state, to let other folks know what is possible if they just change their orientation and don't just accept things because it's always been that way. In terms of the role of doctors, there is no question that there are some doctors out there who are just selling pills to make money. I mean, the vast majority of doctors go into that profession because they want to help people. I mean, they're mission driven to help their fellow man. But they're just bad people in any profession, even lawyers and politicians. And so for those bad actors, they have the attention of law enforcement. We've prosecuted some under our Medicaid fraud authority. The medical board, the licensing board for doctors, takes this issue exceptionally seriously and is beginning to use data to help them go out and investigate doctors. When doctors, I think that the number of doctors who are doing this maliciously is very, very little. I think there are a number of doctors who, through their career having been educated in our healthcare system that was funded by the pharmaceutical industry, I think there are a lot of doctors who were trained to be very aggressive in using opioids to deal with pain. And it's not all their fault, because insurance companies will pay for pills more readily than they'll pay for chiropractic care, physical therapy, or other pain treatment modalities. And society was telling doctors, we don't want any pain. Don't manage my pain, eliminate my pain. And in fact, I will grade you, doctor and hospital, on how effectively you treat my pain. So doctors were under a lot of pressure, and they were under a lot of misinformation in the 90s and 2000s. And so the whole medical system recognizes that they were sold a bill of goods, and they are working aggressively to retrain and re-educate their professionals.
Mason Alexander.
You know, opioids have been used in the treatment of pain since the early 20th century, extensively used in the Great War. And, you know, only now do we seem to have this problem. So why is it today? Why wasn't it 1958? You know, why wasn't it 1968?
Well,
Could you repeat that?
the question was, why is opioids a problem today and it wasn't as bad in the 20th century? For many decades, for about 50 years, from about 1920 to maybe the mid-80s, opioids were not prescribed. In fact, you couldn't prescribe them. People use morphine in battle. So when somebody was at war in World War I, World War II, they had morphine available to deal with the pain of battle. But in terms of whether doctors could prescribe, for decades they didn't prescribe. And then what folks realized in the late 70s, 80s were that it could be appropriate for breakthrough pain, which pain that can't be treated by other things, if you have terminal cancer or if you're in hospice care. And for many years, that was the only time it would be prescribed, was when people were at end of life. There was a famous letter to the editor to the Journal of the New England Medical Journal, whatever the official name is. It was based on some work they had done in an ER in which they had some line saying, "We haven't seen addiction." And mainly it was Purdue Pharma. They were the OxyContin manufacturers. They took that letter and just drilled it into their sales force, who then drilled it into the medical profession. These are not addictive drugs, which was a really tragic development. And if you look at the prescription of opioids from about the mid-90s to about 2012, there was a 4-fold increase in prescribing, and that there was a 1-to-1, 4-fold increase in overdose deaths. Now the connection between prescriptions and death have diverged, and deaths are that much higher because they've created millions of Americans with addiction who are now going to street drugs, heroin and fentanyl, and that's what's killing them worse. Just to give a sense of how our system is different, we prescribe in the United States 10 times the number of opioids per capita than does Japan. 4 to 5 times more opioids per capita than does Europe. And we do not have 5 to 10 times more pain. It's just we have a healthcare system that has prioritized it over the last 20 years, and they're beginning to readjust, but it's going to take time, unfortunately.
Attorney General Stein, thank you very much for
Thank you.
visiting with us.
I
Let's
appreciate
give the Attorney General a quick round of applause. Thank you. And by the way, don't spend that tax refund until you get it. We are about to meet with the Culinary Committee. If anyone is interested in coming and joining us, please do. Michael Bitzer next week, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you. We're adjourned.